Hey there, welcome back to Art Select. And in this edition of Art Select, we present to you Dr. Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson has been instrumental for our self-development and personal growth. And we hope it helps you as much as it helped us find ourselves amongst this noisy world. Saying that Jordan Peterson is just a clinical psychologist is an understatement. Take a look at this clip.
I just wanted to meet you. I'm unwell. I called my mom.
I hope that you
Get up there. I
I
want
hope
to be
that
well.
you find the help that you need.
I want to know him.
Let me tell you something. I think what you just saw is where a lot of you are, but David's just honest enough to cry for help.
So you see, Jordan Peterson is not only just a PhD from Alberta, but also a great mind and someone from whom we could learn. Here is what he had to say about creatives and creativity. What is creativity? How do we measure it? How likely is it that we are going to profit from it? And finally, his advice on long-term strategy for creatives. What is creativity? How do we measure it?
We'll start with that first. So what does it mean to think creatively? It's sort of like, it's something like this. You imagine that I toss you out an idea, and there's some probability that when I toss you that idea, that will trigger off other ideas in your imagination. So you could think about it as a threshold issue. If you're not very creative, I'll throw you an idea, and hardly any other ideas will be triggered, and the ones that will be triggered are going to be very closely associated with that initial idea. So let's say I tossed each of you an idea, and I asked you to tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Okay, so what we would see first is that the first thing that comes to mind for you, the first thing that comes to mind in all likelihood would be shared by many of you. Okay, so then you could think about that as a common response, right? And so that's a less creative response. And then there'll be some things that come to mind for you that are so idiosyncratic that you're the only person that thinks it and no one can understand it. Well, that's also not exactly creative, because the thing that for something to be creative, it has to be novel and useful at the same time. That's sort of a rough definition. Something creative is novel and useful. And obviously, you know, there's a certain amount of judgment that goes along with that, clearly. But if it's too novel, then no one else can understand it, and it's unlikely to be useful. So there's a range of convenience. So anyways, if you want to decide if something's creative, like what we would do, I could say to you, okay, in the next 3 minutes, I want you to write down all the uses you can think of for a brick. Anyway, so you'll get a graph of probability of response, right? And the more probable, the less creative, roughly speaking. It's not the only criteria, though, because you also have to look at utility. So there's this fluency element, and so that's something like the rate at which you can produce, say, verbal ideas. And one of the things we do know about the creativity dimension of openness is that it is associated with fluency. And it's also associated with originality. And originality would be how improbable your use was compared to the uses generated by other people. So you can think of, you get thrown an idea, and there's some probability that will co-activate other ideas. And if it co-activates many other ideas, that's like fluency. And if it co-activates ideas that are quite distant from the original idea, something like that, and you could track distance by comparing it to probability that other people have generated it, then that's also another indication of creativity. So they have to be many unlikely responses that are useful. That's what creativity is, roughly speaking. And then you can fractionate it into different dimensions. So that's creative thinking.
How likely is it that we are going to profit from it?
First of all, let's say you make an original product. You think the world will beat a pathway to your door if you build a better mousetrap. It's like, that's complete rubbish. It isn't true in the least. If you make a good creative product, you've probably solved about 5% of your problem. Because then you have marketing, which is insanely difficult, and then you have sales, and then you have customer support, and then you have to build an organization. And you have to, if it's really novel, you have to tell people what the hell the thing is. People can't search for it online. How are they going to find it? So you just have, and then you have pricing problems, and it's really unbelievably difficult to produce something creative and then monetize it. And even worse, if you're the creative person, let's say you have a spectacular invention. You've got no money, right? You've got no customers. Those are big problems. And so maybe you go and you find a venture capitalist. We start with family and friends, because that's how it works. You raise money for your product. You raise money from your family and friends. That's assuming you have family and friends that have some money and that they're going to give it to you. And most people aren't in that situation. So it's a terrible barrier right off the bat. And then, of course, you're putting your family and friends at substantial financial risk because the probability that your stupid idea is going to make money is virtually zero, even if it's a really brilliant idea. So even if you're successful at generating a new idea and you put it into a business, the probability that you, as the originator of the idea, are going to make some money from it is very, very low. So don't be thinking that creativity is something you would want to curse yourself with. Now, you know, it's not all bad because it opens up avenues of experience for creative people that aren't available to people who aren't creative. But it definitely is a high-risk, high-return strategy. You know, so the overwhelming probability is that you will fail. But a small proportion of creative people succeed spectacularly. And so it's like a lottery in some sense. You're probably going to lose. But if you don't lose, you could win big. And that keeps a lot of creative people going. But also they don't really have much choice in it. Because if you're a creative person, you're like a fruit tree that's bearing fruit. You don't really have, you can suppress it, but it's very bad for you. You know, the creative people I've worked with is if they're not creative, they're miserable. So they have to do it. But, and you know, there's real joy and pleasure in it. And psychological utility, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an intelligent, it's certainly not a conservative strategy for moving forward through life.
And as a final thought, here's advice and long-term strategy for creatives.
And you know, whenever I talk to people who are creative, and you guys should listen to this because I know what I'm talking about. If you happen to be creative, if you're a songwriter or another kind of musician or an artist or any of the other number of things that you might be, find a way to make money and then practice your craft on the side because you'll starve to death otherwise. Now, for some of you that won't be true, but it's a tiny minority. Your best bet is to find a job that will keep body and soul together and parse off some time that you can pursue your creative thing because then, well, as a long-term strategy, a medium to long-term strategy, it's a better one. But it's got incredibly difficult for people, musicians, for example. It's incredibly difficult for new musicians to monetize.
We are here to inspire and motivate the next generation of
it.
artists and designers. Join us today as we share stories from selected creatives about their process through interviews and study of their works and their advice throughout their career as an artist or designer. Whether you're just starting out or seeking inspiration, Art Select is for you. Get ready to learn about the creative processes of selected creatives. If you find the video interesting, please like and subscribe to get notified of our upcoming videos.